28. Asa was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. Unlike David, his father, he did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord. He walked in the ways of the kings of Israel and also made cast idols of worshipping the Baals. He burned sacrifices in valleys of Ben-Hamon and sacrificed his son in the fire, following the disabled ways of the nation of the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. He offered sacrifices and burned incense at the high places, on the hilltop and under every spreading tree. Therefore the Lord his God handed him over to the king of Aram. The Arameans defeated him and took many of his people as prisoners and brought them to Damascus. He was also given into the hands of king of Israel, who inflicted heavy casualties on him. In one day, Pekah son of Ramiah killed 120,000 soldiers in Judah, because Judah had forsaken the Lord, the God of their fathers. Zikri and Ephraimites warriors killed Manasseh and the king's son. Ersah and officers in charge of the palace, and Eklah seconded the king. The Israelites took captive from their kinsmen 200,000 wives, sons, and daughters. They also took a great deal of plunder, which they carried back to Samaria. But a prophet of the Lord named Obed was there, and he went out to meet the army when it returned to Samaria. He said to them, because the Lord, the God of their fathers, was angry with Judah, he gave them into your hands, but you have slaughtered them in a rage that reaches to heaven. And now you intend to make the men and women of Judah and Jerusalem your slaves. But aren't you also guilty of sins against the Lord your God? Now listen to me. Send back your fellow countrymen you have taken as prisoners, for the Lord's fierce anger rests on you. Then some of the leaders in Ephraim, Ezra son of Jerubbeckel, Shalom, and Amasa son of Hadiah, converted those who were arriving from the war. You must not bring those prisoners here, they said, or we will be guilty before the Lord. Do you intend to add to our sin and guilt? For our guilt is already great, and his fierce anger rests on Israel. So the soldiers gave up and prisoners and plunder in the presence of the officers and all the assembly. The men designated by name took the prisoners, and from the plunder they clothed all who were naked. They provided them with clothes and sandals, food and drinks, and a healing balm. All these who were weak they put on a donkey. So they took them back to their fellow countrymen at Jericho, the city of palms, and returned to Samaria. At that time, King Ahaz sent to the king of Ashur for help. The Israelites had again came and attacked Judah and carried away prisoners, while the Philistines had raided towns in the forsaken neighborhood of Judah. They captured and occupied Beth-Shemesh, Ezer, and Gederot, as well as Soko, Timai, and Gimzo, with their surrounding villages. The Lord had humbled Judah because of Ahaz, king of Israel, for he had promoted wickedness in Judah and had been most unfaithful to the Lord. Tiglath-Pileser, king of Ashur, came to him, but he gave him trouble instead of help. Ahaz took some of the things from the temple of the Lord and from the royal palace and from the princess and presented them to the king of Ashur, but they did not help him. In his time of trouble, King Ahaz became even more unfaithful to the Lord. He offered sacrifices to the god of Damascus, who had defeated him, for he thought, since the god of the kings of Aram have helped them, I will sacrifice to them, so they will help me. But they were his downfall and the downfall of Israel. Ahaz gathered together the furnishing from the temple of the Lord and took them away. He shut the doors to the Lord's temple and set up altars at every street corner in Jerusalem. In every town in Judah he built high places to burn sacrifices to other gods and provoked the Lord, the God of his fathers, to anger. The other events of his region and all his ways, from beginning to end, are written in the books of the kings of Judah and Israel. Ahaz rested with his fathers and was buried in the city of Jerusalem, but he was not placed in the tombs of the king of Israel, and Hezekiah his son succeeded him as king. 29. Hezekiah was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 29 years. His mother's name was Abisail, daughter of Jechres. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father David had done. In the first month of the first year of his reign, he opened the doors of the temple of the Lord and repaired it. He brought in the priests and the Levites, assembled them in the square on the east side, and said, Listen to me, Levites, consecrate yourselves now, and consecrate the temple of the Lord, the God of your fathers. Remove all the delicacies from the sanctuary. Our fathers were unfaithful. They did evil in the eyes of the Lord our God, and forsook him. They turned their faces away from the Lord's dwelling place, and turned their backs on him. They also shut the doors of the portico and put on the lamps. They did not burn incense or present any burnt offerings at the sanctuary to the Lord God our Father. Therefore, the anger of the Lord has fallen on Judah and Jerusalem. He has made them an object of dread and a horror on his throne, as you can see with your own eyes. This is why our fathers have fallen by the sword, and why our sons and daughters and our wives are in captivity. And now I intend to make covenant with the Lord, the God of Israel, so that his fierce anger will turn away from us. My son, do not be neglected now, for the Lord has chosen you to stand before him and serve him, to minister before him and to burn incense. Then these Levites set to work from the Kohathites, Matthias son of Amasai, and Joel son of Azra. From the Merarites, Kis son of Abid, and Asra son of Jealous. From the Gershonites, Joas son of Jimri, and Eden son of Joas. From the descendants of Ephraim, Shemer and Joel. From the descendants of Asaph, Jerkis and Matana. From the descendants of Heman, Josel and Shemi. From the descendants of Judah, Shemi and Uzziel. When they had assembled their brothers and consecrated themselves, they went into prepare the temple of the Lord, as the king had ordered, following the word of the Lord. The priest went into the sanctuary of the Lord to profane. They brought out the courtyard of the Lord's temple everything unclean that they found in the temple of the Lord. The Levites took it and carried it out to the Kidron Valley. They began to consecrate on the first day of the first month, and by the 8th day of the month they reached the portico of the Lord. For 8 more days they consecrated the temple of the Lord itself, finishing on the 16th day of the first month. Then they went to King Hezekiah and reported, We have purified the entire temple of the Lord, the altar of burnt offerings with all its utensils, and the table for setting the consecrated bread with all its articles. We have prepared and consecrated all the articles that the king has removed in his unfaithfulness while he was king. They are now in front of the Lord's altar. Early the next morning, King Hezekiah gathered the city officers together and went up to the temple of the Lord. They brought 7 bulls, 7 rams, 7 male rams, and 7 male goats on the sin offering for the kingdom, for the sanctuary, and for Judah. The king commanded the priests and the descendants of Aaron to offer these on the altar of the Lord. So they slaughtered the bulls, and the priests took the blood and sprinkled it on the altar. Next they slaughtered the rams and sprinkled their blood on the altar. Then they slaughtered the lambs and sprinkled their blood on the altar. The goats bore the sin's blood on the altar, and were brought before the king and the assembly, and they laid their hands on them. The priest then slaughtered the goat and presented their blood on the altar for a sin offering to atonement for all Israel, because the king had ordered the burnt offering and the sin offering for all Israel. He stationed the Levites in the temple of the Lord with the cymbals, harps, and lyres, and Kings Seer and Nathan the prophet. This was commanded by the Lord through his prophets. So the Levites stood steady with David's instruments, and the priests with their trumpets. Hezekiah gave the order to sacrifice the burnt offerings on the altar. As the offering began, singing to the Lord began also, accompanied by trumpets and the instruments of David king of Israel. The whole assembly bowed in worship, while the singers sang and the trumpeters played. All this continued until the sacrifice of the burnt offering was completed. When the offerings were finished, the king and everyone presented with him knelt down and worshipped. King Hezekiah and his officers ordered the Levites to praise the Lord with the words of David and of the Asaph of Seer. So they sang praises with gladness and bowed their heads and worshipped. Then Hezekiah said, "You have now dedicated yourselves to the Lord. Come and bring sacrifices and thank offerings to the temple of the Lord." So the assembly brought sacrifices and thank offerings, and all whose heart were willing brought the burnt offerings. The number of burnt offerings the assembly brought was 70 bulls, 100 rams, and 200 male lambs. All of them were burnt offerings to the Lord. The animals consecrated as sacrifices amounted to 600 bulls and 3,000 sheep and goats. The priests, however, were too few to skin all the burnt offerings, so their kinsmen and Levites helped them until the task was finished. And until their priests had been consecrated, for the Levites had been more consecrated in consecrating themselves than the priests had been, there were burnt offerings in abundance, together with the bath of the fellowship offerings and the drink offerings that accompanied the burnt offerings. So the service of the temple of the Lord was re-established. Hezekiah and all the people rejoiced at what God had brought about for his people, because it was done so quickly. 30th, Hezekiah sent word to all Israel and Judah, and also wrote letters to Ephraim and Manasseh, inviting them to come to the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem and celebrate the Passover of the Lord, the God of Israel. The king and his officers and the whole assembly in Jerusalem decided to celebrate the Passover in the second month. They had not been able to celebrate it in a regular time because not enough priests had consecrated themselves and the people had not assembled in Jerusalem. The plan seemed right both to the king and the whole assembly. They decided to send a proclamation throughout Israel from Beersheba to Dan, calling out people to come to Jerusalem and celebrate the Passover to the Lord, God of Israel. It had not been celebrated in large numbers according to what was written. At the king's command, the couriers went throughout Israel and Judah with letters from the king and from his officers, which read, "People of Israel, return to the Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, that he may return to you who are left, who have escaped from the hand of the king of Assyria. Do not be like your father and brother, who were unfaithful to the Lord, the God of their fathers, so that he made them an object of horror, as you see. Do not be stiff-necked, as your father were. Submit to the Lord. Come to the sanctuary, which he has consecrated forever. Serve the Lord your God, so that his fierce anger will turn away from you. If you return to the Lord, then your brothers and your children will be shown compassion by their captors and will come back to this land, for the Lord your God is gracious and compassionate. He will not turn his face from you if you return to him." The couriers went from town to town in Ephraim and Manasseh, as far as Jerusalem, but the people scorned and ridiculed them. Nevertheless, some men of Asher, Manasseh, and Jerusalem humbled themselves and went to Jerusalem. Also in Judah, and hand of God was on the people to give them unity of mind to carry out what the king of his officers had ordered, following the word of the Lord. A very large crowd of people assembled in Jerusalem to celebrate the feast of unleavened bread in the second month. They removed the altar in Jerusalem and cleared away the incense altar and threw them into the Kidron Valley. They slaughtered the Passover lamb on the 14th day of the second month. The priests and the Levites were ashamed and consecrated themselves and brought burnt offerings to the temple of the Lord. Then they took up their regular positions as prescribed in the laws of Moses, the man of God. The priests sprinkled the blood handed to them by the Levites. Since many of the crowd had not consecrated themselves, the Levites had to kill the Passover lambs for all those who were not ceremonially clean and could not consecrate their lambs to the Lord. Although most of the many people who came from Ephraim, Manasseh, Issachar, and Jeroboam had not purified themselves, yet they were the Passover, contrary to what was written. But Hezekiah prayed for them, saying, "May the Lord, who is God, good, pardon everyone who sets his heart on seeking God, and the Lord, the God of his fathers, even if he is not clean according to the rules of the sanctuary." And the Lord heard Hezekiah and healed the people. The Israelites who were presented in Jerusalem celebrated the feast of the unleavened bread for 7 days with great rejoicing, while the Levites and the priests sang to the Lord every day, accompanied by the Lord's instruments of praise. Hezekiah spoke encouragingly to all the Levites, who showed God understanding of their service of the Lord. For the 7 days they ate their assigned a portion, and offered fellowship offerings and praised the Lord, the God of their fathers. The whole assembly then agreed to celebrate the festival 7 more days. So for another 7 days, they celebrated joyfully. Hezekiah, king of Judah, provided 1,000 bulls and 7,000 sheep and goats for this assembly, and the officers provided them with 1,000 bulls and 10,000 sheep and goats. A great number of priests consecrated themselves. The entire assembly of Judah rejoiced, along with the priests and Levites and all who had assembled from Israel, including the aliens who had come from Israel and those who lived in Judah. There was Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. There had been nothing like this in Jerusalem. The priests and the Levites stood to bless the people. The God appeared them, for their prayer reached heaven, his holy dwelling place.